Hey, welcome to the City Rev Life podcast. My name is Robey. This is Rebekah, and we are in a series called Healthy Conflict in Marriage. It's actually the second series we're doing on this, and we are going to be working through practical tools to help our marriages grow through conflict. And kind of the premise of this series is a lot of times we view conflict in marriage as, oh no, something has gone wrong. But when we understand that God is using marriage to sharpen each other and to make us into the image of Christ, that conflict actually is something that God uses and that we want to grow through because it helps us grow closer to Him and become more in His image, and really files off the rough edges in our lives. It's like iron sharpening iron in like the ultimate sense in marriage. And so we want to have the tools to use conflict to our advantage. And so we're going to talk about a new skill, something very practical. Why don't you introduce what this new skill is that we're going to be talking about?
Sure. We're going to talk about staying curious. And that's just basically probing for more information, asking your spouse, hey, tell me more about that. Sitting in that moment for them a little bit longer before we want to be heard. Last episode, we talked a little bit about paraphrase and checking in. Hey, did I get that right? You don't need to listen to the whole episode if you don't have time to, but be able to build upon that skill. We'll just tell you about it real quick right here. Paraphrasing essentially is recapping what you're hearing the other person saying, and then just checking in. Hey, did I get that right? And so there's an important skill to be able to understand and make sure that what you're hearing is what is in fact being communicated. So curiosity builds upon that skill and just says, hey, tell me more about that. Help me understand a little bit more about your thoughts on that or what that's like for you.
So essentially, as we talked about, if I'm hearing that correctly, Rebekah, paraphrasing is when one person is communicating something, usually in the context of conflict, someone just repeats that back in their own words, then checks in to make sure they've heard that right. And then the new skill we're talking about is kind of following that up with follow-up questions.
Yeah. Tell me more about that. Just staying curious.
Staying curious in that moment. Now, there's a couple reasons why this simple skill is really profound. I mean, it sounds so small, but this is something that it is a profound shift for a couple reasons. For starters, it goes back to the book of Proverbs 15:32. Here's what it says: whoever ignores instruction despises himself, but he who listens to reproof gains intelligence. I love this particular proverb because being reproved, being corrected, receiving hard feedback or critique, that is so hard. It is literally 0% fun. Like it's never fun anywhere in any context. It's not fun to receive it from a boss, from a friend, from a spouse, from your kids. It's never fun ever. But it is what Proverbs says is if you're wise, it actually, you want it. The wise person wants that reproof because they actually gain something from that. It's like someone, if you've ever coached or you've ever been coached in a sport, if you always despise everything your coach does to correct you, you're not going to grow and become a better player. It's the player who's teachable. That's why that idea of teachability is such an important skill, whether professionally or personally in any context, because we're actually gaining something when we're reproved. And so staying curious is really a follow-up to, as hard as it may be, within the conflict within the context of conflict, staying curious actually helps us continue to grow. It's saying, okay, they're saying that. I want to make sure I thoroughly understand this. And so you're actually asking follow-up questions to gain more insight. So for starters, why would we stay curious? It's just wise. We want to make sure that we're growing. But there's another win for staying curious. Why don't you share the other win for staying curious?
Right. Well, it kind of just puts a new spin on the conversation. We've talked before about, even if you're one person that's willing to employ these new strategies in the context of your marriage, this is one that really can make a big impact, even if you're the only one employing it. We've shared before how we play ping pong, and a lot of times when we've volleyed back and forth, if one of us wants to kind of introduce something new into the game to keep it going. We'll put a new spin on the ball. And that's kind of like what curiosity does. It's putting the pause on my defensiveness or my point of view and getting that heard and getting that point across and saying, hey, I want to hear from you a little bit more. And that's like putting a new spin on, your ping pong game, because you're not expecting it, but it can also encourage the volley back and forth in a hopefully more positive direction, because now the listener is saying, or the storyteller is saying, hey, I don't have to fight so hard to be heard. The listener is a willing party and participant in this conversation. And now that amygdala, that stress center that we've been talking about, can be disarmed. And there's room and there's space to share what that experience is like, or what that person's trying to share.
Yeah, I love the ping pong illustration because you can do the same hit over and over. I'm thinking like that Forrest Gump scene where they're just like this, like back and forth, like a million miles an hour. But you can do the same hit and just put a different spin, and it forces the other person to respond differently.
Correct.
I love that. And so, you may be listening to this episode and you may be saying, well, this is great, but my spouse is never going to listen to this, or they're not going to employ this. And that's what's so valuable about what you're saying. All you have to, if you change this, it will just by yourself change the whole conversation.
Correct. Yeah. You can't help but return the serve or return the volley differently when a new skill, a new spin is put on it.
Yes. And so let's maybe give an example.
Yeah, let's do that.
So like an example might be, maybe there is a fight and it's like that Forrest Gump ping pong match. It's the same back and forth. You just keep having the same fight over and over and over. You're just hitting it the same way. Well, maybe what you try is hit it differently, put a different spin on it, instead of just back and forth. Well, here's my point. And then, oh, here's their point. Here's my point. Here's their point. And it's just back and forth. And you're trying to make your case. Interrupt that volley and say, well, tell me more. Why do you think that? And so imagine this is the scenario. Imagine one spouse has a job opportunity. And maybe she came home from work and she's given a promotion, and this promotion is going to require her to travel a lot. Well, she says, I can't imagine not getting this promotion. Or maybe it's the husband. He can't imagine getting, how could I not say yes to this promotion? I mean, it's a promotion. Isn't that what my career is all about, is to be promoted and go through the ranks? Well, he comes home or she comes home and they're super excited. I got this promotion. And all of a sudden the spouse gets real quiet. Like, well, wait a minute, you're gonna be gone all the time. Well, what about the kids? Or what about this? And maybe one of two things happens. Maybe they blow up and they're, how could you say this? Don't you want this promotion for me? But how could you leave the high? Don't you know that's pressure's gonna put on me? And it's back and forth, my opinion, your opinion, my opinion, your opinion. Or maybe they are having the fight without having the fight, and they've gotten real frosty. They don't even broach the subject because they're having it like inside their minds what the back and forth is. One simple thing that could disrupt that whole conversation and change the whole spin is put a different spin on it. Hey, I'm sensing that you're concerned about taking this job opportunity. Tell me more. Well, why do you feel like it? Well, if you take this, then what is that going to mean with the kids? And we had these goals with our family. Well, tell me more, and probing into that and seeking to understand and asking more and more follow-up questions. And then maybe the other spouse gets an opportunity to share. And that when both parties are getting an opportunity to express that, then they can thoroughly understand, and instead of being back and forth, they can make a decision together. Anything you'd add to that example?
I think it's a great example. I think, it takes discipline though to be the one to pause your point of view, your thoughts, especially if you're the one coming home and you're excited about this opportunity. A lot of times it feels like that wet blanket when your spouse is of course, thinking about what that change means now in terms of their day-to-day, and isn't joining in immediately on the emotion of the excitement. And I think at some point, one of the parties has to interrupt that cycle and choose to say, okay, I'm going to let this person go first, and I'm going to explore, I'm going to probe for more information. And it's making space for, hey, what you have to say is important to me. I value it. I want to hear more about that. And that also may impact then your response, when hearing what that job promotion is like for that person at work and what that means for them with their goals and all the things that hopefully you as a couple have been building together, that might then change the perspective on, okay, is this a sacrifice worth making? Or here's some little things that we can do differently. But someone has to go first. And I think that's probably the challenging part about this skill is we all want to feel heard, but it really allows space to say, hey, what you have to say or what you're going through is important enough. I'm going to pause what's going on right now with me to make space to hear you out.
Yeah. And so maybe one thing we could do is just give like a couple example phrases. So, and especially if it feels very vulnerable, maybe something that you could say is, hey, I've got a lot of thoughts on this that I'd like to share, but why don't we first, let me just hear from you. So that also is creating space later for you to have an opportunity to share and kind of cueing your spouse that there are more that you have that you would at some point like to share, but you're kind of putting that on the shelf and thoroughly going through and sharing and asking questions until everything's out. You want to get it all out so that you can both fully know each other and work together through this. And then you can then share at some point, they can ask you questions, hopefully. So any other maybe just phrases that someone could say to kind of initiate that curiosity and staying curious?
So, just exploratory phrases like, tell me more about this and fill in the blank. Like, what do you want to hear more about? Especially if they give you a lot of information, maybe there's one piece that you feel like, okay, I do want to hear more about everything, but let's just break apart this one piece first. So tell me more about this aspect. Also, just maybe help me understand more about this, or when you say this, what does that mean? Exploring with your spouse a little bit more about, hey, I'm trying to understand, unpack that for me. So keeping that line of communication open, it again keeps us in that frontal lobe that we've been talking about. It disarms that stress center, creates space to be able to discuss and really dig in a little bit deeper into maybe one aspect of the conversation. And it keeps hopefully both parties just as curious in discussing it with each other and for each other.
Yeah. I think the phrase staying curious is important because it's not staying interrogating. And so I think it could kind of go without saying, but I think we should say it. There's a way to ask a question that is interrogating. Why do you think that? Well, why does that bother you? Why is this? Why is that? I mean, there's a way to do it in which that will keep someone on the defensive. But when you're staying curious, and that's also why we started with that idea of Proverbs, is that you're wanting to know because you're wanting to personally grow yourself. And so you want to be asking these questions, not to put someone back against the wall, but you want to truly understand where they're at. And so obviously there's a tone with which you want to ask these questions. So, well, thanks for joining us on this episode of our podcast, the City Rev Life podcast. And we hope you join us next time.
Thank you for joining us on City Rev Life. You can subscribe to this podcast, rate and review wherever you're listening to this. And we love it when you share it with your friends on social media. For more videos and content, go ahead and check us out at cityrev.org/podcast or download our City Rev Church app. Have a great day.